Good morning, everyone. Um, just one more minute while we admit the last couple people, and then we'll get started. All right. So, good morning, everyone. This is our first quarter webinar with the team at Mainer. Um, Before we get started, as always, we like to begin with a prayer. So, if you'll join me in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, thank you for your unfailing guidance and the wisdom you bestow upon us daily. As we navigate the complexities of life, we are grateful for the clarity and discernment you provide in our decision making. Your light illuminates our paths, and your truth steer us towards righteousness. In moments of uncertainty, your wisdom is a beacon that guides us through. We are thankful not only for the support you give, but also for the challenges that refine us, teaching us to rely more fully on your grace. Help us to keep our hearts open to your guidance and to trust in your eternal wisdom, which surpasses all understanding. Grant us the courage to make decisions that align with your will and the peace to accept the path you lay before us. We are grateful for your hand in our lives, gently guiding us towards our purpose and strengthening us for the journey ahead. In your holy name, we give thanks. Amen. So we have a special guest this morning from the team at Mainer. Her name is Sarah. Sarah is going to be the one conducting this webinar this morning. So we want to thank you so much for joining us. I also see that Gary is here. Many of you are familiar with Gary from your on-site visits. So Sarah, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Gary, did you want to say a few words first to kick things off?
Sure. Thank you everyone for attending today. Your attendance is greatly appreciated. I know this is an issue that's come up, issue concern, something we've talked a lot about during on-site visits with the internal control reviews is just the budgeting, working with your volunteers on your finance council and getting budget information and making sure that we're in a good place moving forward. So I'm excited to hear more from Sarah today. And if there's any questions, you can go ahead and pop those in the chat. And then Sarah and I will work together to get those answered along with Barb.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I have to say, being a special guest makes my day just start off wonderfully. So thank you so much for that. I'm excited. Hopefully I can hold up to the special status that you've granted me. So I'm hopeful today is a little bit interactive. I haven't been had the opportunity to join you in some of the historical sessions that you've had, but my goal is by the end of things I have to say, we can get some engagement. So like Gary said, absolutely put things in the chat and we'll answer questions. But I really, as we're going through kind of best practices and the why behind why we create some budgets and we do projections and we plan for the future, as we're going through that, I want you all to think about why it's so hard. What challenges do we see? You know, what do you go through when you're working with your parish, with father, with the bookkeeper, with whoever it is that's on your team, whatever role you're in? What are the challenges? And this is a space that it isn't a negative thing to think of challenges. Our goal is to talk about the challenges so that we can work through, you know, how to make it better, how to improve it, and how to think outside the box. So that is where we will kick off. So of course, we are all about budgets today. If somebody could just say thumbs up, you see the screen okay? Perfect, thank you. Awesome. So first off, again, we need to figure out why we're here. Why do we even care about budgets? So these are just some fun kind of famous quotes. If you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else, which is kind of tongue in cheek, right? If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there because who knows where you're going to end up. If you don't know exactly where you're going, how will you know when you get there? I mean, we're just running to keep up with something, but we don't know what that final place looks like or what that goal is. If you don't know where you're going, every road, pardon me, will get you nowhere, which is funny because it's kind of the opposite of the second one up there. You're going to get there, but now you're really not getting anywhere. Just depends on how you're looking at it. And then if you don't know where you're going, you'll be everywhere and end up nowhere. And if you don't know what you're doing, you'll try everything and end up with nothing. So that kind of summarizes all of the above quotes. So today, budgeting, it seems a little bit deep. Some of these things seem a little bit deep for just talking about a budget, but you know, from a strategic perspective, a finance perspective, that's how we look at it. The budget is supposed to help you get to the vision of the parish. It's supposed to help you grow, or it's supposed to help you reach out to the parishioners or provide in the community, or whatever, you know, goals that the parish has. That's what this budget is supposed to support. And if we don't think about those things together, then again, we're never going to get there, or we're always going to be challenged, which clearly I'm going to say in this day and age, with so much uncertainty, with so many funding streams going up and down and things going on in the world, it's just really difficult to predict the future. So we want to be able to control everything that we, or touch everything that we can control. So again, purpose of a budget, we talked about financial planning. So that is a huge purpose of the budget. We want to make sure that we're planning for the future, planning to sustain our strategic missions, but it's also allowing us to have better decision making. If you have, all decisions should be data driven. We want to make sure that this budget is a tool that you can use to decide when capital improvements should be made or could be made, how much deferred maintenance on your assets, on your building, on your property. Are you deferring to future years? A budget will help us not just next year, but for future years, be able to kind of lay the groundwork with when we can start a maintenance plan on some of those things. It allows us to decide if we want to renovate the parish, if we want to host a different type of a fundraiser, if we want to sometimes close a program or an affinity group or a school or a community activity that we haven't thought about in the past. The budget, this whole financial planning process, helps us understand that. Fiscal responsibility. Obviously, I mean, that's our responsibility. That's what your finance councils need to look at. That's what the diocese needs to look at. And really, that's what everybody needs to look at in order to be able to hold up their end of the deal, if you will, to the parish. And then transparency. We want our parishioners to continue to give. We want our parishioners to be able to support the parish. And in order for them to feel comfortable doing that, we have to have some balance of transparency. Obviously, they don't want to know all of the detail in the weeds. So some of the things that we'll talk about when you present it globally, it can be rolled up. So it's summarized categories. But at the parish level, you definitely want to get into the weeds a little bit. Are there any questions on why we prepare a budget before I go to the first one? I'm going to keep prodding so that hopefully by the end, people are engaging and typing or chatting. All right, we're all excited to prepare the budget. That's step one. That's good. The next thing is, what do we need to budget? So there's all sorts of different categories that we talk about. What do we budget? We definitely obviously budget for the parish. We budget if we have a school. We budget if we have a cemetery. And all of those things really, I believe from the diocese as well, just best practices, should be budgeted separately. They're going to roll up together, but we want to make sure that you can identify what revenue streams and expenses are attributable to each one, so that it doesn't get too murky and muddy. Again, this is the more data that we have, the better decisions that we can make, right? If you have a school that has a lot of shared services with some of the parish activities, it's important to at least think about, what would it look like if we broke them apart? How much of this expense in particular is attributable to the school versus the parish? And some of that seems like it could get too complex depending on the size of the parish. But again, we definitely want to make sure that it's worth your time. So those bigger buckets, we want to know where we're spending those funds so that we can have that data for future decision making and future plans and projections. So the next slide,
Sarah, just for a second.
Yes,
what we
absolutely.
also found, especially with cemeteries, and this comes up, you know, during visits and also when people are submitting their budgets, they're surprised that we ask for the cemetery to also be spelled out with their annual reports or their budgets. And they're like, why would I need to do that? Well, do you know if the cemetery has enough funds to continue taking care of itself? Is it taking care of itself now? Your parishioners are going to want to see, and you're going to want to see for yourself whether or not it is funding itself, or how much is the parish offsetting. Same goes for the school. Is it needing to be offset, and is that something that the parish knows and is fine with, or is that something you never really realized? We are finding that when we do ask people, hey, give us that information together but singular, they are surprised at what they see. So that's why we ask for it.
That's
And
a really, oh, go ahead, Gary, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, and I think one of the added values to that by doing it, like especially with the school singularly, is that when your finance councils and the school board start to have discussions of the appropriate rate of tuition, by having that budget split out, you're able to make more informed and better decisions as far as what the tuition does need to be for, covering the cost of that per student.
That's a really great, both of those are really great points. And to align also the cemetery in particular, using a budget to look at what the maintenance is on an annual basis is critical to know, like, there's opportunities to set up an endowment or an investment fund with the intent of that paying for the cemetery operations for year to year. It's difficult. It's a difficult sell, to use a crass word. I know sales isn't what we're about, but it's a sell to a donor to say, we want to set up this investment fund to pay for it if we don't really know what the operations are. A donor is, or a parishioner is much more likely to give if they can say, oh, I see how this is being utilized. I want to help sustain the cemetery as well. And I'm going to give to that endowment fund, or I'm going to give to that investment fund. Same for the school. I completely agree with that. It is a tricky thing, especially when we're talking about tuition, because the higher the tuition goes, potentially the lower the enrollment is, right? So we have to make sure that we're looking at those ratios and things as we're developing the budget, but looking at how much support the parish provides to each of those other entities and initiatives is critical for you to decide as a parish how you're going to move forward. Very good. Are there any questions on that, specifically with, why cemeteries, why schools, separate budgets? All right. So the next thing I have is just an outline. And this is, again, very, very big picture up here. I've got some samples if we really want to dive into Excel spreadsheets. As an accountant, I have to admit that I can nerd out on a spreadsheet with the best of them. So I will try my best not to do that today. But we look at different things. And oftentimes when I see people building their budget, they look at the previous year, and then most expenses, they might increase 5%. They keep a lot of the revenue relatively stagnant. Like they'll say, we might increase a little bit or whatever that might be. And at the end of the day, we may even, hopefully this isn't your parish, but we may even fudge a little bit so that we get to zero, because we want a zero balance. Oftentimes with nonprofits is what I see. What my suggestion is, an absolute best practice is, don't do that. Don't just look at 1 year in a silo. There's all sorts of blips on the radar that you can't ever identify by just looking at the previous year compared to this year. Here I've got the previous 3 years. Sometimes I even go back 5 years with the pandemic in some of our things. With the pandemic, you may even want to show in the schedule, here's 2 years pre-pandemic, here's the last 3 years, and this is where we want to go. I see some parishes and just organizations in general that are still trying to either get up to the revenue levels that they had pre-pandemic, or they're saying, gosh, we're still operating the same as pre-pandemic, but the world is different. What do we need to do differently? And how does that impact our budget? There's a lot of strategic planning and kind of mission work that should be part of your whole budget process. Again, very passionate about budgets, so forgive me for that. But is there anybody on the call that goes back more than just a year or two when you're looking at budgets? Joanna, I very much appreciate that you're visible.
She's also taking notes.
I know. I love
Uh,
it.
And just so you guys are aware, the slides and the recording will be sent to you normally within a week. One thing I did want to notice, a perfect example is the time of year that we're in, of why you wouldn't just look at 1 year, snow removal. If
Yeah.
you went by just last year, your totals are going to be in a whole other realm, really, than what they were last year. So by looking at least 3 years, you are seeing trends.
Right. Right. The other question I have, yeah, oftentimes finance councils only see that one prior year. That's very, very common. I would challenge in a very positive way any finance council members that are on the call, whether or not the rest of the team is with. It's relatively easy for the accounting team to spit out additional years because it's just a function of printing that report from the accounting software. So it isn't like a huge ask to ask your finance team for that, or your accountant, your bookkeeper on the team. It's not a huge ask, but it does allow you to be a bit more curious with expenses in particular, but even with revenue. How many, or is there any conversation on where we are compared to revenue pre-pandemic versus post?
We do have one finance council member saying they didn't look any further than 22, 23, 24, and then one that is saying that their finance council encourages looking at prior 3 years.
Yeah, great. It is great. And again, it's a good opportunity. There's nothing wrong with how things are being done. If you're only looking at 1 year, you just have an opportunity to expand what you're looking at. This isn't a negative thing, or even, when you're talking to the team members, it's not negative how things are being done. We're just trying to expand understandings. So are most parishes kind of back to pre-pandemic? Are you still looking at on the revenue side, the offerings? Are those struggling to get back up, or you're right where you were? Well, this is a good opportunity to take a look and set some goals for the parish. I know there are some parishes out there that they absolutely want to show the trends. We all, not by individual, obviously, not individual giving, but as a whole, showing the parish community, the Catholic community in your area, what are our giving levels? Because there's a lot of people out there that want to give to a cause and want to give to their family, which is the community that they're in at the parish. So those are just good metrics to be able to look at, to be able to talk about, not only as a finance council, but then with the rest of the leadership, because the finance council looks at the dollars, and sometimes there's a disconnect. How does that translate to the parishioners so that they understand the why we're asking for funds or asking for a campaign or whatever that might be? It's a great opportunity to kind of renew those conversations. I do have, we mentioned that we will send these slides. I do have some additional kind of budget worksheets, big Excel spreadsheets that we'll send along with this. I would just caution their templates. Certainly don't pick it up and use all the line items exactly how it is. When you're looking at a budget spreadsheet or a budget worksheet, it really should start at the big picture, mirror your financial statements. It just has additional information. And then usually there's support on the different line items. So a good example on that support side is contracted services. You don't want to just increase your contracted services by 10% when you don't really know what was sitting in that kind of big account in the first place. You want to have kind of a supplementary schedule about what those expectations are. If you've got professional services, if you have snow plowing, if you've got maintenance, if you have all of those different things, what are the expectations on that at that granular level? In the spreadsheet that I'll send along, this is just a snippet of the spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet that I'll send along with the file will kind of give you some opportunities to think about that. So next, we've talked about how to do it, best practice. We definitely want to look at more than 1 year. We want to look at the granular level as well as the big picture. We want to make sure that we look at the different categories. And we said the parish, the school, the cemetery. And I would also say if you have different programs within there, definitely look at those kind of isolated as well with their cost center broken out. It allows those leaderships, those director level positions to be able to own their program. And, you know, if they see something, whether it's community outreach or community engagement, or whether it's younger generation education or younger generation outreach, they'll have that budget that they can work with, and they can report and respond to leadership on their future plans. So again, planning for the future. So first we talked about looking backwards multiple years. The other thing that's really important is to look forward multiple years, which is incredibly difficult, especially when we know the world seems to change like drastically day by day. So the thing to remember when we're talking about planning for the future, there's some reasons. Obviously, when we're looking at personnel, what we do today is going to impact us years to come. We want to make sure that we're not hiring a position today that we may not need in 3 years. That's a conversation that you need to say, well, do we really want to be committed to this? Because you don't from a empathetic, a personal level, you don't want to hire someone and then have to talk to them about not needing them 2 years from now because the program's gone or whatever that might be. Similarly, you don't want to burden somebody today where you're kind of saying, well, you know, this job is kind of overwhelming for one person, but we don't have a need for more. I think in 3 years we might have a need for more, but today we don't. Sometimes it's good to fill that position today because you're planning for the future. So you're always wanting to look at what the goals are for the parish years down the road. The other reason that that's really beneficial when you're talking to some of the stakeholders and the parishioners, it allows them to see the vision. This is why we need to fund this today. It's not going to impact us for 3 years or something like that. The other thing is capital items, ongoing expense. I said the word deferred maintenance a little bit earlier. If we put off maintaining our boiler system, our roof, our sidewalks, our parking lots, like some of these different things, there's many times that costs us much more in the future. So it's really important to look at all of those capital expenditures to say, okay, even it, you know, this sounds silly, but in the kitchen area, oftentimes those were all installed at the same time. And individually, they are not that costly. But if now you have to buy new refrigerators, new stoves, and ovens, everything all at the same time, that's a costly repair. So it's important to look at the future budget to say, oh, these are about 7 years old. It looks like all of this is going to go in the next 7 years. It looks like we're probably going to have to repair our roof, not this year, but 3 years from now. So are there things that we need to do with our current year budget? So it's not going to be a zero budget. It's going to be trying to have a little bit extra so we can continue to build a fund for the roof in 3 years. It's planning ahead for those future expenditures that we might have. It also allows us to make better decisions today. It allows us to identify long-term funding needs. Sometimes these conversations aren't even being had, and I'm certain in all of your parishes they are, but I have absolutely, and I think Gary can attest to this as well, been to some organizations and parishes alike that you have a conversation and they were surprised because they had a roof repair, or they were surprised because, you know, something went out, a boiler went out or something. But then when you start asking questions, there hadn't been maintenance on it. So really, we probably could have guessed it was going to come up in the relatively near future. Gary, have you seen some of those things in your travels?
Yep, and that's something we talk with a lot of the parishes about. Like Sarah had mentioned, a lot of the parishes, you know, you guys do have plans in place. You know that the roof on the rectory or the roof on the parish is 25 years old. You know, in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have to put a new roof on it. You know, being, you know, with what construction is right now, that's not a $10,000 project. That's a couple $100,000 project. Similar with boilers. I think there's a lot of finance councils out there. You guys are doing a good job of just making sure that you're kind of keeping up on what are those long-term expenses. You know, maybe it's not an immediate need, but like Sarah had said, how many times have we had a boiler go out, a water heater go out? You know, there's different large projects that we know we're gonna have to do, parking lots, those kind of things. So by putting that in your budget, like Sarah had said, and just saving that money year to year, that way it's not a hit to your one budget that year, all of a sudden that now we gotta spend $250,000 on a parking lot. Where are we gonna get that money from? You know, we've planned as an organization to have some of that money put away. So it might be, we have to spend $250,000 on a parking lot, but we have $95,000 saved up. So now how do we move forward with that extra money in the budget?
That's a great example. From the diocese level, do you recommend how they do that budget if they've got this $250,000 allotment? Do you have a specific account you want them hitting?
Well, we always encourage that the funds be put in their DNL accounts. That can help them raise funds as well,
Right.
because it's interest bearing. But and then it also stays with our standard operating procedures of how much money stays in your account and how much is invested. What I would encourage you and what I see normally is that people will have like a capital improvement line item that they use, and that's considered other income and other expense. So it's not within your operating budget. It's like when you look at your financials, it's down at the bottom. So you can still have your operating budget, but then still plan for and record properly that this is for something else.
Yep, that's perfect. And again, like was said, it's not a separate budget, but it's definitely a separate thought process because it's not part of those operations. So you're no longer just saying, well, out of all of our operations, we want to hit zero. Maybe that's true, but you want to have this extra bucket for future capital or current capital expenditures. And then on future financial statements, you can still track that. Say it's going to take you 3 to 5 years to maintain that balance. There's different reporting mechanisms, but that can show on your statement of financial position, your balance sheet, that can show like, this is our fund. These are our restricted funds for, you know, capital projects or our roof repair or, you know, whatever that initiative is. Definitely.
Well, and because we do have a set list of general ledger accounts for everyone to use, that's where your projects and programs come into play, so that you can really distinguish that, as well as marking those as restricted or unrestricted, so that you can really show your parishioners, you can show those who maybe you're seeking a grant from, how this is being used, how you are raising funds. Maybe you have to match those funds, and you're able to pull those a lot quicker.
Absolutely. Thank you. The other thing that planning ahead allows for, it allows you the opportunity to consider if you may need debt, if you may need to either get new debt or if you want to pay down debt, a mortgage, for example, or a loan, if you sometimes haven't been able to plan ahead, but you still need that roof repair. There's certain situations it allows those sorts of things, again, to not be a surprise to anyone. The last one is preparing for economic and other external challenges. This is really preparing for a rainy day. You've got this rainy day fund. It allows you to be ready, maybe not for another pandemic. I'm not sure any of us are ready for that, but it allows you to prepare for a really, really snowy year, like was said at the beginning, or whatever that might be. With all of the volatility in the world right now, it's hard to tell what the economy is going to do in the next 12 months. And that impacts your donors, that impacts your investments, all of those things. But this allows you to kind of think through, where do we want to be 5 years from now? How do we make decisions today to make that not quite such a uncertain place? Are there any questions on that? All right, before we get to challenges that you've incurred, so this is another just warning that I'm going to start asking some more questions. So I hope people can think of like the hardest things about budgets and the hardest things about, you know, having these conversations and things like that. We've got a couple things to kick off, but that's your second to last warning that I'm going to put you on the spot. So then once we have our budget, how do you really use this? Because oftentimes we see organizations that, okay, somebody told us, the diocese told us we have to have a budget. So we pass this budget, it's in the system, and there you go. What do we do with it? It is important to look at this critically. From a finance council perspective, definitely. You are looking at budget to actual results. And if the answer is, well, the budget's off, the budget's off, the budget's off, that means your budget wasn't really helpful, right? If the budget was off, then you need to, every single month, you're looking at, why are we still off? Was it really a poor budget? Is it a poor budgeting process? Or is there something that's hidden because the budget was just off? And that's an easy answer. That's another reason it's really important to look at multi-years, because if you think, Gary and I are both certified fraud examiners as well. So there's a part of my brain that's always looking for things. It's like a puzzle and looking for a needle in a haystack. So forgive me for this next statement. This is not meaning that there's anything amiss at any parish, but it is very difficult to find a needle in a haystack when you're only looking at a little bitty piece of the haystack, right? If you're able to look at a trend, for example, and you're looking at 5 years and you're budgeting based on the 5-year trend, not the 1-year trend, it's easier to see when there's an anomaly. We used to talk years ago about black hole expense accounts. And from a budgeting perspective, often people would just increase across the board operating expenses 5 to 7%. We know the cost of living is going up. 7% might be high in past years, but we've seen higher cost of living increases at this point. But so we'll say 2 to 6%. People would just increase their operating expenses, and that includes this other or this miscellaneous that nobody really dove in or dug into what was in that account. And in some organizations, unfortunately, there were inappropriate transactions in there. So all the board was doing was increasing the budget of misappropriation inadvertently. I mean, they didn't mean to do that, of course, but that's what they were doing because they weren't looking at the historical trend. And if they had looked at 5 years, 10 years out, they would have seen that account grew 10% every year. 10% in 1 year, okay, I can explain that away. 10% every year in other expense, I can't explain that away. So just some little things why it's so important to take a look at that. Look at the revenue and expenses on a monthly basis. Obviously, every single month, we talked a little bit about capital projects. Capital projects and what you're doing. That list of all the capital projects coming up should be, I'm not saying that you look at it with a fine-tooth comb every single month, but it certainly should be reviewed because we all hear about things. Oh, this step broke, the door broke, something else broke. Those things should be added to the list so that we can continue to plan for future years and in our next budgeting cycle. Obviously, operations, staffing changes, unplanned events that might happen, those things, the Finance Council should absolutely be open and comfortable asking about every single month when we're looking at those budget to actual reports. And then outside trends. Sometimes I've seen in organizations, we expect things to be relatively close to budget and we don't think about everything happening in the world. So Barb mentioned snowfall. Well, if our budget to actual report, we budgeted based on a previous year, which maybe had a lot of snowfall. I don't remember actually if 24 had a lot of snowfall, but let's pretend that it did. So this year our budget is pretty high for 25 for snowfall, and maybe we're going right along, but then you think about it, well, we haven't had that much snow. We shouldn't be close to our budget this year, right? Our actual should be lower. There should be a budget gap expectation. And sometimes we don't think about that. So it's really important on a monthly basis or quarterly, if the Finance Council is meeting that frequently, to think about outside trends, things that are happening that would change our expectations. And then performance measures. How do we know this budget is a reflection of our performance? Are there any other things that we're looking at on a regular basis, whether it's probably giving, whether it's people that are consistently giving every month? Those are good metrics that are not part of the budget, but it's a good add-on to a budget conversation. And then The more frequently we look at these budget to actual results, again, on a monthly, at minimum quarterly basis, the quicker we can take corrective actions. If our donations are down more than we thought, what do we have to do to all of our expenses or to other areas? Do we need to think about a new fundraiser, a new type of fundraiser? Do we need to think about cuts in the school? Do we need to think about, if the school budget isn't aligning, or actuals aren't aligning with our budget, do we need to think about the parish supplementing more than we had anticipated? And if that's the case, do we need to go back to parishioners and, have a different sort of an ask that is strictly for school funding? Those are the conversations that are always better to have early rather than late. Gary, did you want to say what you put in the chat?
Yeah, Barb had just mentioned about the grants, and there are a lot of grants. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of grants out there that you might be eligible for. So it would behoove you, it would be worth your time as a finance council or even as a parish to just be cognizant of what grants might be available to you. I know that several of you have taken advantage of security upgrades from some of the grants that are out there. And we're able to replace door locks and electric, all of your electric locks on the schools at least. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you move forward, that there may be some grants out there to alleviate what you might actually have to pay out of pocket per se, versus, applying for and receiving one of those available grants.
That's a great point. And oftentimes, if you're applying to those grants, you have to create a budget specifically for that. That's a great question, Chris. How do we find those grants?
So there are several websites, and I'll try to get those together and get those to Barb. But you can go to these websites. They cater specifically to nonprofits and what grants and awards might be out there. But it's sometimes it feels like a lot of hunting and pecking to try to locate those. But there are some sites out there that kind of pull it all together. So we'll try to get those for you.
That is the age-old question. How do we find the grants? How do we find the money? I feel like nonprofits or religious organizations, we're always trying to figure out. There's a lot of private foundations out there that their grant opportunities are even more difficult to look for because they're private. So they may not list on a large database. It's about relationships, about trying to see who the private foundations are in your area, or stakeholders that are in your area. So that's it's a good point. Sometimes it's so difficult that people get discouraged about it. There's also, like Gary mentioned, some of the databases that are out there, they do have like a fee, but you can put in, the state of Michigan has a good one that's not fee-based, but you can put in your interest area. Like it might be grants for infrastructure or for operations or for, whatever your need is, and it will send you notifications when those come. But again, some of them are fee-based, so you can pay like a membership to a national database, a fee, and then that is actually a place that some of the private foundations and other organizations do post their grant funding opportunities in. It's also a good idea, aside from just online searches, just to tell your parish, we're always looking for grant opportunities. Sometimes people just don't think about it. And within your parish, I'm certain there's a lot of people that are very, very active in the community, and they may know, they just might not connect the dots that the parish would be a potential grantee, because they think a nonprofit, sometimes that line is a little bit more gray. But thank you, Gary. We'll put that list together. Is there anything, Barb, that you want to add on the grant side?
Not on the grant side, just something else that you had mentioned about like watching out for using other or miscellaneous. Now, I can tell you from an accountant perspective, we never want to see anything in miscellaneous. But budgets are also a great opportunity, and you'll have seen that this past time with your annual reports, we asked you to, if you had anything in these others, to give that detail. It's because we want you to take a moment to look at those. Why is it under other? Why did you need to do miscellaneous? Is it really a one-time thing that you don't expect to ever have again? So we want you to look at that. Also, your requests and donations. Are you really keeping track of the ones that are restricted, that need to only be used for a certain project? You definitely don't want to be in a situation where you raised funds for a roof, and now all of a sudden you're using it for a parking lot, and parishioners feel that they haven't been given the appropriate information, or that you raised funds incorrectly. So it's just something that we really want you to look at. And this is an opportunity to be like, whoa, wait a second, how come we have this amount in those others? And I would encourage you to only use miscellaneous if you absolutely have to, and please don't. But but what it also is a great opportunity for is there are some parishes that they're a cluster. And this is also an opportunity for you to reevaluate those percentages of reimbursement. Um, we don't want you to have one and done when you're distributing what the costs are between parishes, or maybe you have somebody that puts in work for the school and the parish. So we want you to take the time to reevaluate those, because things change.
That is a really great point, and I'm going to add that actually to the slides before we send this out. It's really important to look at allocations. If you do have shared services or clusters that you're sharing personnel or whatever those might be, absolutely. Times change, things ebb and flow. You want to make sure that you continue to keep that relationship on a positive note, which means you're always evaluating things for the positive. Gary, did you want to speak to the comment in the chat? That's some great information. I can do it. I thought you were actually looking at it. That's my fault.
Yep. Knights of Columbus is a good organization, one to look for if you have a local Knights. They're very good, and I've seen a lot of the parishes. You have a good working relationship with your local Knights. All of those are very good.
Community foundations also, that is one of the first ones, St. Mary Parish. Thank you for posting all of that. That is a great comment. There are community foundations all over the state, and they oftentimes are holding funds. Some of it is just for their community, but they have donor advised funds. They have private foundation or donor advised funds that are held there for whatever that donor wants it to go towards. So that isn't necessarily always this exact same mission of the community foundation. So you have more opportunities in some cases to get some things that are a bit specified. Those are great. Banks, credit unions often have some things. Definitely. Great comments. Thank you. All right, the last slide that we have is this budget challenges section. So, what are challenges that we have with budgets? Why are they so difficult? Or maybe they're not. Well, I'll kick it off with the thing I hear most of the time with why they're so difficult. And it's just we don't have time to really do it justice, because there are a lot of things going around. So you get somebody on a call like today and we say, well, it's really fun to look at 5 years back, and then you can really dig into the numbers and you can, think about strategy for the next 5 years and put it all in this beautiful spreadsheet and it'll be great. There's not a lot of time in the day for that. So that is the biggest challenge that I hear from people. Does anybody else have that issue? I mean, I'd be surprised if the answer is no, because it's always difficult to find time for these things that seem like they're just extra, the thing I will say to that, and the best advice, I guess, because it's a little bit of a mindset change or shift in making sure that budgeting is a priority and it's not a monumental task. Setting up some of these reports to show multi-year in your accounting system, it's not a difficult thing to do. And then it's already set up so you're printing instead of every single time you're like, oh, how did I print that report before? I don't really remember where the data came from. And then making sure that, for example, in the contracted services explanation or whatever that is, one of those accounts that has a lot of different services in there, make sure that you have these extra schedules and that you're saving those files in the exact same place every single year, regardless of who the treasurer is, regardless of who the finance council chair is, regardless of who the bookkeeper is. We see so many times, because there's transition in leadership or bookkeeping positions, or, it's just one of those tasks we're trying to fit in, that we're like, gosh, I have to start over because I can't find all of my detailed working documents from last year, or because it's written on a piece of paper. My notes are on a piece of paper. That's always a challenge too. Where do those piece of paper notes go?
It's also a great opportunity when you're meeting and going over your monthly financials. Oh, you know what? We should make a note of, like, have a budget file for your next budget that says, oh, this was a one-time thing for our contract services. This, you know, we have mentioned that we expect this to be more or less. Make those notes, and just, it can simply be in a Word document that you save for budget 2025-26. And then it gives you a place to go back to with all the information that you've already kind of filtered out throughout the year.
That's a great point. There's also spots in many accounting software where you can actually put a comment in the transaction so you don't forget it. And you say, I mean, that's going to come in handy when you're doing your monthly or quarterly budget to actual reviews, because somebody's going to ask you the question. And if it's on this Word document that Barb mentioned, or in the transaction comment, something in the software, if it's there, it won't be like, gosh, I don't remember. And I don't know about any of you, but frequently I think there's no way I'm going to forget this. And then I forget it a year later, whenever it comes up again. So I don't know. That might be age. I'm not sure what's going on with my memory, but I frequently forget things. I don't think there's a chance I'm going to do that. What other challenges are there?
I kind of, just to speak on that a little bit, what we just talked about, sometimes when we're out at parishes and we're talking with you guys, the question comes up, it's like, well, when should we start the budget process?
Good.
And my answer is always kind of, well, it's kind of an ongoing, it's not a certain date. Like your budget's due July 1st. The diocese wants you to have it to them by sometime in June. Do we start this May? Is it April? It's kind of an ongoing process, to where Barb had kind of talked about a little bit of, keeping that file and keeping your information going. So every month when you're reviewing everything, you are kind of creating the next budget, even if it's not officially, kind of on paper and in your mind. You've got an idea of what your next budget might look like based on what you're seeing month after month.
That's a great point. That's a great point. We always recommend third quarter of your fiscal year. That's when you're starting for the next year, at least. And I say start, that is like officially you've got your schedules and you're reviewing, because then you've got half a year under your belt and you can start to see, what did we miss? What are we planning for next year? Agreed, it's happening all the time, but that's really when you're getting your schedules out to take a look at things, definitely. And realistically, if part of the reason for that is if you wait until fourth quarter, so if you don't start thinking about your budget until May or June, if there's something that needs to change in operations or additional fundraising events or whatever it might be, it's really difficult to execute on that between May and August. And if that's the case, you might not be able to have an actual budget impact until later in the fall, and you've missed a whole quarter of the new year trying to change something, if a change is needed. So,
well, and what we hear is, but we don't have our full year yet. You do, because you may not have the full year that you're in right now. So you have 3/4 of it, and you do have a quarter that is in the prior years. So you do still have 12 months of data of that information to make that budget. Because we do hear that often, but my year's not done yet. How am I supposed to do a budget if I'm not done yet with this year?
That's another great point. And in most accounting software, I would say all, but I always hesitate with 100% in all. But most accounting software, you can just set it to run the report from April 1st of 2024 through March 31st of 2025. So it's going to summarize that data for you, and you don't have to add the columns together. You don't have to do any of that. If you need help with that, certainly let us know. But that is, most accounting software will do that automatically. Are there any other challenges or questions that you've got about budgeting? All right, well, I will put our contact information up here. As always, we're happy to help. We are happy to just brainstorm things if there's challenges as you're going through things, if there's things that are quirky in the accounting system and you just can't get the information out. I know Barb and the team at the diocese is always there, as is Gary and our team. So thank you very much. Gary, did you have anything else to add, or Barb?
Nope.
Well, you did live up to the special guest, I gotta say. So
Ah.
thank you so much, Sarah and Gary. We love doing these with you guys. And we hope that everybody did get something out of this. And we are excited that May 15th at 10 o'clock will be our next webinar. And like last year, we did our second quarter with our kickoff, because it's not just about those who are going to be visited this coming year by the team at Manor. So it's going to be our kickoff, but it's also going to be, what are the myths about internal controls, myths and challenges, and because we want you to also know, when we get your responses, we do read every single one of them. We do take in that information, and we want that communication. So we're really excited about that one on May 15th. And we are still looking at topics for our fourth quarter one. So if you have ideas, we are always interested. Just send those to anybody in the finance department, and we will get those on the list to consider doing in the future. So have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.